Okay, recording is started, and I am here with Don the Pleb. What is going on, my man?
Uh, I'm making my slowest reintroduction to the internet humanly possible. I think that's what's going on.
I don't blame you. Man, they reinitiated my Twitter, and I like kind of went crazy for the first week, and then after that, I was like, oh yeah, I remember why I don't miss this place at all. There's like nothing about this that I find appealing.
Mm. So Twitter's a giant problem because it's a huge time sink if you let it be, but it's really only good for like maybe 15 minutes a day.
Mm.
Right. And like you get to that 16th minute, and you're like, God, I hate everything.
Well, and see what I'll do is I'll go through almost my entire week and I'll like tweet once, twice, like every couple of days. And then come the weekend, I'm drinking beer and I feel like talking shit, and I just start
Yeah.
talking shit.
That's the other thing Twitter's really good for, but people get all upset. Like, all right, in fact, I don't know, like a month ago, I started this thing where I get that feeling. I'd be like, all right, I'm drinking and I'm going to post everything under this thread. So if I quote tweet you under this, like, just understand this is Dawn's random drunk thoughts. And there, every time is like 10 people respond to the top tweet. They're like, don't do it, dude. Don't do it. You're going to post something you regret. And so, like, I'll sit there and drink and shit post for a while. I get up in the morning and read it, be like, man, none of this was that bad. It could have been worse.
Well, what I'll do is, especially if I get drunk, I just won't look at it for 2 days, and then I'll go back and I'll just like skip all mentions and just like start over.
Right.
Just
Hit the
reset.
notification tab and then just leave.
Because I just don't care.
Oh man. That's required for that place too, right? Because God forbid, like every now and again, I'll get into a serious conversation on Twitter with somebody I know outside of Twitter, and we'll be talking, and then immediately under like the third worthwhile, useful thing to say is like, I can't believe you people are blank slate cucks. Like, bro, we were talking about ice cream.
So, how's the how's the homestead coming along?
Strangely well, though slow because everything is expensive and nothing is on a store shelf anywhere. So
Right. Yeah. I feel you.
I'm it's people, it's funny because I talk to people in literally all walks of life, and about half of them come to me and they're like, Don, you pay a lot of attention to this kind of stuff. Like, is this supply shortage thing real? People keeps talking about it like it's a real thing. I'm like, well, 3 weeks ago, I went to 2 separate Lowe's and 2 separate Home Depots, and I couldn't find 2x6s. So, like, I mean, I don't know. Does that sound real to you?
Jeez, man. Yeah. And I work at a lumber store. Yeah. I can vouch for that. We were out of 2x4 92 and 5/8 studs for almost a month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a what? God, that had to be the end of last year, maybe.
No, this was just a couple of weeks ago.
Was it? Oh man, that's not good.
Yeah.
Does that mean he's gonna hit me soon?
Yeah. We ran out of 92 and 5/8 studs. Now, I mean, we're doing a lot of GLO homes, which is government land office of Texas homes. And so it's a government project. And so what happens a lot of times is they'll call in like 4 frames at one time. And so you're building these frame packs and you run yourself out of material, but then you got to wait. Then you're back ordering for the next few weeks, trying to catch up on the material. And shit, when it came to the sturdy floor, what do you call that shit? The glue, the sturdy floor acrylic glue shit.
Oh, yeah. Whatever the hell that stuff's called.
Yeah, I can't even think of the name of it right now. We were back ordered for 2 years on that stuff.
Jesus.
Yeah.
So 2 years is a long time.
Yeah. I mean, as soon as it got in, it was out to somebody we had back ordered like months before. And it took us 2 years to get caught up on that shit. So yeah. some of it is really difficult. Some of it's not. Like it's touch and go. And I think depending on the area, what the demand is, what you're demanding, just because I'm over here in the Hurricane Central, the government has taken on, instead of FEMA reimbursing all these people and giving all these people a shit ton of money for the flood damage, what the government decided to do was say, okay, this is costing us way too much money. What we're going to do is we're going to come in, we're going to demolish these houses. We're going to hire home builders to come in, build the houses up on pylons above the ground, like 10 foot off the ground. And therefore, in the future, we don't have to worry about the flooding.
Well, I guess to be fair, you don't until you absolutely have to rebuild the house, right? Because as soon as it starts taking out pylons, then
well, I mean, they're building them on 16 foot long 10 by 10s.
I mean,
and they're concreted into the ground about 8 foot into the ground, at least, sometimes more.
That's I guess if you're going to build them like that, that's the way to go.
Yeah. So they're stable, if nothing else.
Yeah. Right. Oh man, that's funny because there's stuff to do that sort of thing that comes up as a shortage here all the time. Like for some reason, for a lot of reasons, I'm suddenly looking at laying like a ton of hundreds of tons of concrete, and so you get stupid stuff that you can't find, like concrete anchors. There's just none, we're supposed to get them in 2 months. How did you run out of concrete anchors? Like, it's a J hook. Come on.
Yeah, right. It's a piece of rebar that's bent.
Which was, I mean, it's become this thing. Like, there's the hardware store guys and any of the decent construction supply guys. They're all starting to know me. And I come in and I'm like, hey, can I get this thing? And they're like, no, but you want this aisle over here because that's the stuff where you could make one.
Yeah, you can find the stuff. Yeah, exactly. Man, I think our closest store to you is Abilene.
That's probably true. There's nothing here. That's why I'm here.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not one in Amarillo. There's one in Abilene. That's the closest one to you. Well, that's crazy. Because we're all over. We're a Texas company. The company I work for is a Texas company, so it's all over Texas. But yeah, there's not one close to you.
No, there's
what the fuck? It's raining.
Yeah. Oh, you too, huh?
It was freaking 95 degrees and sunny 2 minutes ago.
Yeah. Well, I hear that's less of a thing down there, but up here, that's how it goes every day. Like this morning,
it's like this all the time.
Yeah, this morning was I don't know, high 80s or something like that. And right now I've got cloud cover as far as the eye can see, like 20-mile-an-hour winds at least, and it's starting to rain.
Yeah. Well, I had a fire going too. Shit.
Not anymore.
Yeah. I'm watching the smoke pour out. Like, oh, I'm dead. All right. So, all right. Well, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Durham Report. Did you look into this any? Or, because it was pretty much what we expected, but there was one part of the story that I found really interesting.
So I haven't much. All right. It was one of those things that they were like, the Durham Report's coming out. And I went, why do I want to read this? Like, guaranteed there's something in there that's interesting, but it's going to be 300 pages of obvious. And then I'm not going to care. And so I read like 5 articles on it and was like, this is exactly what I thought would be in there. I'm not reading this thing.
Okay. So the really interesting part, I found really interesting, at least because I was paying attention to it in 2019 when it was coming out, there was this Dashenko guy. I think I'm saying his name right. So this Dashenko guy was actually charged by Robert Mueller, right? He was one of the few guys that was actually charged by Robert Mueller. And he was this Russian that lived in the United States. So they were so concerned about Russian disinformation. And the FBI and even John Brennan was aware that the Russians had access to Hillary Clinton's communications within her campaign.
Right.
And so this is what I find. So they had prior to any of this taking place, so they know that the Russians have access to the communications of Hillary Clinton's campaign. Prior to all this taking place, they were investigating this Dashenko guy as a possible Russian spy. Now, they never closed the investigation into this guy. They thought he just left the country, but he didn't leave the country. So they just lost
13, the 13. Is he one of the like 13 guys that they charged that they were like, these guys are in Russia back in 2018 or 19 or something like that?
No. This was some guy they got on like perjury or something. It was something stupid. Like they didn't charge him with anything serious.
Because why would they really?
Yeah, right. Why would they? So it appeared, if you look at the way that this all lined out, it looks like the Russian disinformation was actually coming through the Clinton campaign and not the Trump campaign. They were feeding information into the Clinton campaign because they knew the Clinton campaign was looking for the information. So they're just dumping this information into the Clinton campaign to tell.
Yes.
So he was the one that Peter Steele had hired to get the information on the piss tape and all that shit.
He's that guy.
It's that guy. And so all that shit was coming out was intentionally meant to divert and create this whole thing. So the people that were so concerned about Russian disinformation were the arbiters of Russian disinformation because they had been infiltrated by the Russians.
You know, I wish I could be surprised by any of this, but you know, this is the sort of thing that when it was Hillary's campaign had paid for not all of, but some portion of the dossier, I was like, so what you're telling me is you're the purveyors of, at bare minimum, British misinformation, but it sounds a lot like Russian disinformation.
Yeah, and so they kept talking about Trump bringing foreign influence into the election, and the Clinton campaign was the one hiring the foreigners to bring the influence into the election.
Yeah,
and then the FBI. So the FBI, they're trying to figure out like why they didn't have a tab on this guy, and they never closed the case on him. They just said, "Oh, okay, well, he left the United States, but he never left the United States." He's feeding this information to Peter Steele. The FBI offers Peter Steele $1 million if Peter Steele can come forward and show evidence that all this information that he's giving them is actually accurate, and he's never able to come forward with evidence because Dashenko just disappeared on Peter Steele.
I feel like this is slowly turning into like a Who's on First skit.
Yes. Oh, it's just so fucking funny, man. I was like, that is so insane. That is the most ridiculous shit I've ever heard in my life.
It sounds right, though.
The Russians are feeding you disinformation to make you believe that the Trump campaign is feeding disinformation.
Can you imagine being the intern that invariably was like, I think something's wrong here, and the entire campaign is just like, no, shut up.
Right. And then when I remember right after the Durham Report came out, Tim Pool, I saw that he did a story on it. I was like, all right, let's see what this guy has to say about it. So I clicked on it, and he played a video of Hillary Clinton saying that the Durham Report sounded like Russian disinformation.
Perfect.
I'm like, this is clown world. I mean, idiocracy has come to realize.
I'm really just waiting for President Camacho. That's it. I want a State of the Union with a saw in it. That's what I want. Nothing more, nothing less.
Just comes out freaking with a Brondo fucking t-shirt on.
Exactly, right?
It's what plants crave.
Right. The dude on the side of the stage is going to be like, brought to you by Carl's Jr.
Oh man. Whenever I ran into this, like this particular detail that John Durham had like tied together, I was like, holy shit, man. How stupid do these people feel?
Oh, probably none. I mean,
Well, and Andrew McCabe keeps coming out saying that John Durham was completely wrong. John Durham doesn't know what he's talking about. Completely wrong. It's like, because he says that you're a fucking a tyrant that used the FISA courts for your political benefit. That's why you're saying that.
Yeah. Well, the balls that it takes on somebody in 2023 to be like, yeah, we would definitely never abuse the FISA court after like the 8 prior times where they get caught abusing the FISA court. Like, no one believes you, dude. No, like people who support you don't believe you.
Right. Well, and that paranoia kind of brings us to the next subject I wanted to talk about. Like, that paranoia is so entrenched in the political like thought and mind of everybody who pays attention to politics all around, especially those of us who have read up on the history of the CIA and the FBI, and we understand these things. We know that we were lied into Iraq. We know that we were lied into Afghanistan. We know all these lies that have been floating around. We were lied into World War I. We were lied into World War II. We were lied into the Gulf War. We were lied into every war, right? And so that paranoia, it kind of resides. And it reminds me of that William Casey quote where he says, we'll know our disinformation campaign is complete when everything that the American people believe is false, right? And this was Ronald Reagan's CIA director. So we dig into this and we see this manifesting and all around us. And so anytime somebody that has a decent message comes forward and create and begins to gain clout, the first instinct of everyone is to go, that's a Fed.
Oh yeah.
And there are feds everywhere, and everybody's a Fed except for me. I'm the only one I can verify that is not a Fed.
Right. So this exact thing started me, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, just being like, everyone on the internet is a Fed. We're all Feds. I'm a Fed. You're a Fed. Everybody is a Fed. Right. Because there's one guy on 4chan. That guy's not a Fed. Right? Everybody else, though, everybody is the Fed. Now, being as 4chan is a bunch of anons, like, good luck finding that guy. But still, everybody else is a Fed. And people started getting really mad at me because I just overtly mocking that everybody is a Fed thing. And they're like, but Don, there are Feds on the internet. I'm like, yeah, there are lots of Feds on the internet. That's true. But I mean, how are you determining who is or is not a Fed? And generally speaking, the success line is a real thing, right? Like I've known guys who ran podcasts for years and years and years and never got any traction. Then one day they did something, right? And that something got a lot of traction, and all of a sudden they explode. And from then on, what you get is like graphs of their subscriber growths that start immediately. Like there it is, like right here, immediately before they explode, and the graph just goes whoop, and it's this is obviously AstroTurf Fed off. I'm like, what about the 3.5 years before that, where that guy had 900 subscribers?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I've been chipping away since 2018. Like, so if you see me get 10,000 downloads on an episode, that doesn't mean like I just popped onto the scene. There's no such thing as an overnight success, and if there is, then obviously you got to look at them. But then there are these people that pop onto the scene, right? That have like 24 episodes, they're getting 296,000 downloads, right? And so yeah. Obviously, like I ran into this concrete podcast. I saw that Jay Dyer was sharing them. So I was like, all right, I want to check out one of his shows. And I saw he had interviewed John Kiriakou, somebody I interviewed in the past, who is a CIA whistleblower, like obvious. And a lot of the guys that this dude is talking to are CIA. So I clicked on one, and this guy was like, the first thing that the guy that was a CIA commando, whatever he did in the CIA, he called himself a commando, which is perfectly reasonable. Could have been one of the jackals that John Perkins told us about. Fine. But one of the first things he says is the CIA running drugs and blah, blah, blah is bullshit. That's not what CIA does. And it's like, wait a second. This is straight propaganda, because dude didn't even push back on him. So wait a second. We know that no, he didn't even push back. You know,
it's like there was dozens of documented times where not only did the CIA run a bunch of drugs, they came out and were like, yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, I mean, there was Operation Gladio where they were running heroin through the mafia into the Bronx and throwing it into the ghetto and infecting the black population of the Bronx with heroin. And then there was Iran Contra where they were running crack cocaine into LA and Cincinnati. Like, we know that this happened,
right? They've come out with receipts a couple times and been like, yeah, that might have been us,
right? And so it's like, okay, this is obviously straight propaganda. Don't pay this guy any attention. But then you'll see somebody that hits big, and you start going through their history, and you find like what you're talking about. This guy's been pounding away and grinding for 5, 6, 7 years, and finally just something clicked. Yeah, he just got the right subject at the right time, the right guest, you know, and so he kind of takes off and gets something. And that's good, man. Like, we want the independent media to be competitive with the corporate mainstream propagandist arm of the government, and you can't expect that to happen if you keep slinging arrows at the guys that are doing it.
It's my favorite thing in the world, right? Is, well, we know the mainstream media is garbage. Like, all right, it's hard to argue with at this point. They lie about everything, and they do it pretty overtly. Fine, but if you for any reason are successful as alternative media, the only reason that's true, unless, when I guess to be fair, this is only 50% true. Unless you're Alex Jones, the only reason you're successful in alternative media is because the feds are propping you up. And like, wait, well, I mean, maybe just because they're not destroying you, but I don't know if that's propping you up, right? Because like I don't know. I had a decently growing channel for a while there, and then all of the internet went, you're not allowed to grow anymore. And then I couldn't. It was that clear, you know?
Right. Yeah. Well, and it's like, so you look at these guys like a Tim Pool, right? Like, this guy he's not a fly by night, like overnight success. This guy's been grinding for years.
Yeah. He's been on the internet for like a decade.
Well, for as long as I've even thought about a podcast, he was doing it, you know. He was out there on the street. He was in Turkey when there was that uprising in Turkey, you know, in the Civil War. And he's been involved in all these things all over the place. He was part of Vice News when they started up. So is like, when people say he's a Fed, I'm like, he has some mainstream opinions. He's kind of vanilla. I don't agree with him on everything, but I don't think he's a Fed. I think he's being honest.
Yeah, well, so I would have a much easier time with almost any criticism of Tim, except that he's a Fed, right? Like, anything else you could say, I'd probably have to shrug a little bit and be like, yeah, that's probably true. But if that guy's a Fed, right? The implication of Tim Pool being a Fed is that he happenstancely, after years and years and years of grinding out on his ass, the feds came to him after he was totally set and were like, would you like to be an informant about something? And he went, yes. Right. Now, maybe that's true, right? And to some degree, I imagine it would be, right? Like, if someone's trying to bomb his whatever ranch thing that he's got going on, and it's I don't know, a terrorist plot, and the FBI comes down and is like, what do you know about this guy? He's probably going to tell him, right? But at the same time, I don't like he what I mean, I met Enrique Tarrio before he did, so like how is he being a Fed? You know, and no one ever has any answers. It's all just like, well, but like, you know, he's not kicked off of every platform. Like, well, yeah, him and the quartering and who's the idiot, Philip DeFranco, right? They spend all of their time trying to figure out how to not say anything on YouTube that will offend YouTube,
right?
And
yeah.
So, like, these guys dedicate more man hours to that than I do to anything in my life.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, of course they're allowed to stay. Not to mention at this point, they all, you know, get to actually call somebody at YouTube, which I don't.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but
yeah, because they were some of the original content creators, like back in, 2012, they were creating content,
exactly,
so I didn't start until 2018. Why should I have near as much pull as this guy? Like, no, I said pull. Huh. Pardon the pun.
But I mean, it's, I started much later. I'm much smaller. And for anybody who's never made content, no platform cares about you until there's a 1 million under your name. Right. And at that point, it's not even necessarily that they care about you. It's just they're willing to listen to you. Right. And somebody's going to be like, Don, but it's really only 500,000. Like that does not change the point at all. Right.
Yeah.
For all of the people that you listen to that don't have, 500,000 or more next to their name, or like, I got this video struck. No one cares. Right.
Right.
Just there is no recourse.
I don't have like a big issue with Tim Pool. I don't really like to listen to him that often. I listen to him every once in a while, but it's not like often. And I think he's wrong about some things, but I don't think he's getting paid by the government to say these things. No. I just think he's wrong about things. Just like some of my best friends are wrong about, my wife is wrong about things. I'm wrong about things. Like it just happens. This is the way the world works, right?
There's a funny thing. I mean, if we want to be at least halfway serious about this for a moment, there's a funny thing where we are in time, right? Which is to say that we have been powers that be in this country have been astroturfing propaganda, because we got to use big words to say lying to people, for what are we at, about a century now, right? In some fashion or another. And we know that that's true through any number of times where they've got caught. And even if you want to just call it 75 years, which gets us back to about 1950, which is to say the CIA finally got done and buttoned up with World War II, became the actual CIA, and then it was time to start lying to the American public, right? I mean, that's basically what that means.
Yeah. Yeah, the OSS did nothing wrong beforehand, though.
Well, maybe, but generally speaking, no. But because of that, we now have a point where, things that are obvious propaganda that people believe is not abnormal, right? It's if you talk about if you even say black flag or not black flag, false flag, people are like, yeah, whatever, conspiracy theorist, right? A term expressly created by the CIA to stop people from talking about what the CIA was doing.
Right.
And it still reigns supreme today, right? Where, a bunch of normies, one of them will just be like conspiracy theorist, and then everybody will, oh, conspiracy theorist, that guy's an idiot. Yeah. Right. And you're standing there with, 75 pounds of proof going, but evidence, right? And Tim is a giant product of that, right? And his favored methods, or his favorite pieces of propaganda, came out of Bernie Sanders, late 90s to about 2010, right? And it doesn't, and I haven't checked in on Tim in a while because I don't tend to find him that valuable, but I used to on a regular basis. And you could still hear him say things like, well, maybe socialized medicine is not the greatest idea, but maybe we could do something close, right? And it's just all this output of this halfway socialistic late 90s crap. And
Mm.
he's repeating things that you hear you would have heard come out of Clinton's mouth, or any of the people who worked for him, with the hypothetical exception of Condoleezza Rice, or not. What was her name? The Waco broad.
Oh yeah. Victoria Nuland? No, that was Ukraine.
Well, Newland was back there too, but not Condoleezza Rice. It's I forget her name, but
yeah, I can't. I know who you're talking about. I just can't think of her name right now.
But you hear these things, he says these things over and over and over again. And it's funny in a sense because it's sort of like what Orwell was saying as the reality of the Soviet Union was appearing, right? Where as the atrocities started to mount, as the bodies started to pile, Orwell was, at the time, a socialist, and so was like, well, maybe this implementation is bad, but the idea is good, right? And the answer is, of course, no, right?
Right.
but it's been like, and go back and watch him. He'll, in the world of what I think he does that's damaging, is that he will say nothing, right? And insofar as he says everything, right? Quite a while back, I picked a literal random video, just went to his channel, click. We're going to watch this Tim Pool stream and we're going to check and see if he says anything. And in the first 5 minutes, it's the Democrats' fault, but it's the Republicans' fault, but it's the Democrats' fault, but it's the Republicans' fault, but it's the Democrats' fault. In 5 minutes, right?
Mm.
And he is, every single time he says it, hard lining, it's their fault. And I went, this is how you both say nothing and everything, right? Because if you're the kind of person who wants to hear that it's the Democrats' fault, Tim has said that for you. If you're the kind of person who wants to hear that it's the Republicans' fault, Tim has said that for you. If you're the kind of person who wants to hear that there may or may not be some fault on both sides, and it's kind of a complicated issue, so that you can think to yourself you're vaguely informed, but the issue is going to require some sort of expert, a thing that Tim relies on very heavily, right? Is, we want expert opinions. When his subverse that never came about, but I think is basically Timcast, was being ginned up, what was he saying is, we're going to talk to experts, we're going to get the expert opinion on the thing. Now, don't get me wrong, this was before 2020, and it was definitely before 2021 when the experts started to look like complete asshats. Yep. But if you were paying attention to experts prior to that, you weren't surprised. You
knew they were going to look like asshats,
right? Like, you people say dumb shit all the time, but this is another line of the rolled back to a different propaganda, because that sort of problem goes back to Wilson, right? Where what we need in this country is rule by experts. And so Tim's not a Fed. He's just propagandized.
Yeah. And it's funny. I think since the whole COVID regime and all that shit kind of passed over, he kind of got labeled as right wing. And so it kind of feels like when I do listen to him, I'm getting a little bit of a different part. And that might be due to age. It might be due to what he's experienced in people calling him right wing or whatever. But I still find him kind of behind my own thought on the way I would approach these subjects. And so he annoys me with his analogies, because his analogies never make any fucking sense.
No. So part of the reason
I didn't mean to make this the Tim Pool stream.
I have made rather notorious comments on Tim, so I held off as long as I could. But part of the thing with that, right? And generally speaking, I don't care about Tim insofar as these things are useful, because these things are things you see in other people, right?
Right.
And so part of the reason that Tim gets labeled right wing is because the left moved far enough that Tim went, I don't think I could do that. Right. And so this is where, he'll tell you that's true overtly. I didn't leave the left left me.
Same with James Lindsay, Elon Musk, and all these other right-wing heroes.
Mm-hmm. they're yesterday's leftists, right?
Yep.
Roll Tim Pool back to 1985, and he will be called a crazy commie who should be kicked out of the country,
Mm.
right? And that's not even that long
McCarthy would
ago,
have put him on a list.
right? Would have given him his own list. Like, this guy is great in media, and he is a nutball that's destroying the country.
Yeah,
And
Stalinist and
yeah, and so but the left kept right on marching. They, we need to trans the kids soon. We're going to need to trans fetuses, right? And on and on and on. And at some point, Tim's disgust mechanism got triggered and went, "Oh, I can't do that," right? And right about then, he started to call himself a centrist. And some of those things were, if you listen to him long enough, you'll hear him tell you what some of those things were, right? Like I think gay rights are good, but I think this pedophilia thing is disgusting.
yeah.
Right. I think gay marriage is good. But that doesn't mean polygamy is good, or any number of these little things that he'll say along the way. And so what you're not listening to somebody when you're listening to Tim, despite him being called right by the left. He's not particularly right wing or conservative or any of these things unto himself. He's just not the tip of the spear anymore.
Well, you can hear that whenever he talks to like Seamus Coughlin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Seamus is a conservative. He's like, you're like probably a paleo conservative, I would say. Like, and he's kind of goofy for me. I'm kind of like, I feel like I'm a little bit more radical than he is. So it's kind of like the way he words things. I just kind of like, okay, like that's fine. You can say that if you want. Sometimes it's funny,
Yeah.
But you can hear it. But he's not as far like left as like Ian, that other guy that's on his show, right?
Yeah.
Who's completely retarded half the time. I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
That's the way that, I mean, so who's the guy that get kicked off there? I don't remember.
Some guy got kicked off of there.
Yeah, there was somebody way back at the beginning of Timcast, long-haired hippie surfer dude, prior to Ian, the long-haired hippie surfer dude. And he was, I forget his name, and I should know it, but semi-retired or something. And so basically people would come on the show and he would ask them questions like a lefty, and they had answers, right? Well, how is this idea that we're going to arm everybody going to help? And they'd be like, well, do you want to walk into a movie theater in front of a firing squad and pull out an AR-15? Because I don't, and you're like, well, I guess that is kind of a good point, and they're not even like super huge points that they were handing him. It was just, hey, have you thought this through, as opposed to whatever you hate is bad.
Right.
And he very quickly started moving to the right, like super fast. And personally, I think more than other things, that's why Tim got rid of him, because Tim is rightly aware as a broadcaster that a bunch of people sitting around jerking off to how correct they all are is not good content in no way, shape, or form. Like, if I just came on here and was like, I agree with you about the Durham Report. I agree with you about there's a problem where we all call each other feds. Yes, it's a very serious problem. Yes, Tim Pool is not a fed, and I think it's well worth discussing that Tim Pool is not a fed, and that he is just wrong about some things. Like, just that little monologue, somebody's already falling asleep, right?
Right.
And that's all it takes. And so you can't have Tim trying to play the centrist, kind of a revolving right-wing character, because he's got a few people that fit that bill, and then not a leftist, right? And so Ian gets on there and says ridiculous shit because he's a fucking leftist. And so you have to have kind of a courteous back and forth. You can be upset, but only so upset. otherwise it becomes, internet blood sports. And while
Mm.
that lasted for a little bit, it was never gonna last, right? Jerry Springer of the internet is only ever so good. And so, Tim is in the world of broadcasting shops. I think the guy does great, right? Like, he knows what he's doing. He knows how to put this show together. But equally speaking, all of the people who were like, I don't know that these shows where we just produce some conflict and people say retarded crap at each other. For those of us who are old enough to have been around in the late 80s and early 90s when these shows started to get popular, there was a lot of commentary that was like, I don't know if these are a good idea. I think they're bad for the country. And that's still
Mm.
true, right? And I don't think Tim thinks what he does is bad for the country. I think he thinks it's good content. And very clearly, whatever I think of it, he is correct. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he gets plenty of views. What do you think about some of these other shows that have popped up? Like, let's take like The Hill, for instance. It's not something I watch very often. I actually haven't watched it in a long time. Until today, I ran into a couple of their videos where they were covering the Durham Report. So they got this Reason magazine style libertarian. I can't even think of the guy's name. I don't know the guy's name. And then this progressive, really hardcore progressive leftist doing this like news analytics show set up kind of like a CNBC or something like that, where they sit there and they kind of bounce ideas back and forth and they talk about the news of the day. And they're openly like stationed out of DC. So they're not like trying
Is
to
this
hide that.
The Hill? Like, once
Yeah, like
once upon a
Rising.
time, the magazine, then the internet publication, The Hill.
Yes, yes. And they have a show they do called Rising.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And then you have like Breaking Points with Crystal Ball and Sagar, or however you say his name, that keep going on Joe Rogan's podcast and acting like they know how to do the news. And I listen to them and they just sound like they're just repackaging like Young Turks talking points. And I'm just like,
so you're just seeing. I mean, The Hill's probably a great example. You're seeing the attempted evolution, right? So when in 1995, basically the only news publication that was on the internet was the New York Times. Nobody, and the New York Times website was basically like, click here to subscribe to the New York Times and we'll send you a newspaper, right? Like, it wasn't anything spectacular. They weren't uploading millions of articles or anything like that. And it might be more like 98, right? But very early on, a couple of publications went, this is going to matter. This is going to be the method of distribution. And those guys did okay in the transfer to the internet. I mean, think whatever you want of, the New York Times, the LA Times, and all the other lefty rags that they are, but they're still doing well enough, right? They're not local paper number 7 that closed its doors 2 years ago, right? Those guys are all gone. And the next evolution, and this goes to a way bigger problem in society, which is time preference, right? The next evolution is you don't read, the 14 inches, right, of famed article length, right? That was your good in-depth assessment, was literally 14 inches of text in a newspaper, and that's dead, right? And so, and you see them write articles for this right now. They already know 90% of people are only going to read the headline. Of the remaining 10%, at least 50% are stopping at the third paragraph, right? So maybe 5% of the people are reading even a majority of that 14 inches. And everybody knows it, right? And because of the moment they have a bias, the moment the whatever the paper is, they want to say, I reported the real thing. And we have all noted that they do this for years, where the headline is like, Donald Trump raped babies, right? And the first paragraph is, this person has said Donald Trump raped babies. And the second paragraph is, and there were other witnesses, though they refused to come forward. And the third paragraph is like, this is being investigated by the FBI, the CIA, your mother, the dog down the street. Everyone is interested. And like the fifth paragraph is like, and this is all bullshit, right?
Well, did anybody ever figure out if the babies were sexy or not? Because if they're
I mean,
old
that
enough
is,
to crawl, they're in the right position.
it's that's what we're all missing here, right? And the damn New York Times just is not reporting on this.
Yeah. Okay. So I didn't get on the internet until 2012. I was like, I never even thought it would be an actual thing. Maybe that's because I was a truck driver. I was always working with my hands, and it just never made any sense to me. You know, I was a sandblaster and a grinder,
Right.
and then I was worked for the carpenters union. Then I was a truck driver. So all that the digital world never made any sense to me.
Sure.
But yeah, about 2012, I was like, all right, I'll get on, see what's going on. And so I kind of came in, and there was already this infrastructure existed. It was already there, and it was what it was. I've seen it evolve, obviously, but it's not shocking to me what it's evolved into. It doesn't like stun me. Maybe if I would have looked at it in 2012, go, yeah, this isn't for me, and then come back and look in 2023, maybe I'd be like, what the fuck?
Yeah, right. Well, but that's the thing, because one of to the earlier time preference point, right? Like, so watching it evolve, the evolution of the internet has been shorter, well, smaller and smaller and smaller pieces of information to make you feel as equally informed as the larger piece of information. You watch
Right.
basically everybody doing this right now with shorts, clips, reels, whatever it is that they're calling it, right? It's the rules of all of them are something like 30 to TikTok as a whole does this 30 seconds to 2 minutes or whatever, that sort of thing. And it's people who are it's almost weird to watch if you ever had to learn anything in a real way, right? So like if you were going to teach somebody how to use a sandblaster, you're not doing it in 90 seconds. I just put on the gloves and go, bro. Like,
Right.
you know, that's not coming. But that's now how we're trying to keep people informed, right? Is these about anything, right? And there are guys who are like, yeah, man, so I laid this 400 square foot concrete pad, and it's like a picture at the beginning, and then like of the dig out, and then like there's a quick play, 400 times speed advanced of them pouring the concrete over some rebar.
Right.
You never see them put the rebar in, right? And then right at the end, there's one guy with a finishing trowel, right? Like, this didn't tell you anything. Right?
Yeah. You had no idea how hot it was out there, how much it sucked,
right?
And how much water you had to drink, how many times you had to go piss. Like, you have no clue what the fuck they just did,
right? But you get people who are like super invested in this, and so as all of these publications are moving to video, basically what they're saying is, we have discovered that the people who will read an article are dying, so time for video, right? And so they're going to and almost all online talk shows have this problem where it's like, we will discuss this topic for anywhere between 2 and 5 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next topic, right? And
so
this
how do you think Twitter's going to combat this? Because they're talking about putting Tucker Carlson's show up on Twitter, and I know the Daily Wire just came out the other day and said that all their shows are going to be uploaded to Twitter. What is Twitter? What kind of infrastructure do you think Twitter is going to instill to combat like this? Because I find that if I see a video that's less than 10 minutes, I'm like, they're not giving me enough information.
right. Unless it's something specific, like if a friend sends me a 5-minute video and he's like, hey, that thing we were talking about, this is me doing it, I'll watch that. Right.
Yeah. Something like that. But if I'm looking up something, if I'm looking for something, I'm not clicking on anything under 10 minutes. And
So,
typically I'm looking for something 20 to 30 minutes long. And if it's like philosophy, like about philosophy or politics, I'm looking for an hour, 2 hour video
oh
because
yeah.
I know that there's so much more nuance involved in the subject that can be covered in 5-10 minutes, which is why I think like I'm actually shocked that Megyn Kelly kept the exact same kind of infrastructure to her show that she had on Fox, where she does these like 10-15 minute segments and
Yeah.
moves to another subject. When there are so many subjects you can cover that are so long, like so detailed, and you can really dig into and have a really good conversation about.
So you're one, neither one of us is Megyn Kelly. And think what you want about Megyn Kelly.
Hey man, she may
But she's
be 50 years old, but she's hot.
and that's it. Right. Right. That's the line. Is you could put Megyn Kelly in front of a TV screen with a piece of flat iron, and all she would do is just wave it back and forth, and people would watch it, right? Like 100% that would happen. And
No,
so
but even Glenn Beck, like with the Blaze, he's kind of kept the same kind of like the radio kind of platform.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? That outline. I'm really shocked with that with Glenn Beck. Now he does do that Saturday show where he interviews somebody long form. He's had Whitney Webb on. He's had some good shows.
Yeah.
And then he has the Wednesday night special. He does like a 48-minute long special on one subject. But I'm surprised that Monday through Friday he's doing that breaking segments up.
So in the world of broadcasting chops, right? Every handful of years, somebody releases a study on attention span of Americans, right? And the first time I ever saw this was in the 90s. And at the time, the attention span of the average American was 15 minutes. Now, that was also the average attention span of the average American. And so the implication of that is that it was somewhere most likely between 10 and 20 minutes. That's what you got, which is why back in the 90s, all radio restructured back to 20-minute segments, right? And really more like 15 to 18. It's why they have top and bottom of the hour commercial breaks. It's why they change subjects midway through, unless a particular subject is particularly hot, and then they'll sit with that, right? If people are generating anger about it, then you're going to increase their attention span. And so if people are calling in and are angry about whatever you're talking about, then you can keep going, right? But you can't keep that going too long. And so, and unless it's something like, I don't know, 9/11, right? You get to talk about that as long as you want on 9/11. But on, here in 2023, 22 years later, you don't get to talk about 9/11 for 8 hours.
No, I talked about it for so far. I've talked about it for 11 hours.
Right. But if you did that all at once, nobody's listening. Right. And so this is the reason that they're structuring these shows this way is that one, for the Glenn Beck's demographic that he's shooting for, everybody is sort of looking for 18 to 49, but there is also like a 25 to 40 or something like that that is perfectly good to tell advertisers you have. And so if you're shooting for that 25 and to whatever, right, 25 to 35, 25 to 40, and that's the number you're marketing with, you're looking at the attention span of that group. And so while the average American is probably down to like 2 minutes of attention span or something like that, if you're talking about slightly older people, they have a slightly higher attention span. And so those people, you can run 15, 20-minute segments. Generally speaking, I mean, look at all long form content everywhere, with the exception of Rogan, right? Long form content does okay up to 60 to 80 minutes. Somewhere in there, people argue about where that line is all the time. 4, 5, 6, 8, 10-hour episodes of anything, terrible. What's truly amazing about this is that binge watching is increasing at the same time. So Netflix
Mm.
releases a series and people go watch the whole thing in a weekend, right? But it inside of that series, right? You've got 10 episodes. Each of those episodes is broken up into scenes. There's probably 15 to 50 scenes per hour. So you're swapping what the brain thinks is going on very fast inside of that
Mm.
hour. And so you don't, it's not an attention span of an hour. But if you're sitting here talking like this, the setting remains the same. There's no flashing lights. There's no immediate change. There's not a heavy drama. There's not a massive hook over here, right? All of these things that go into story writing to maintain attention span of people who don't pay attention are not happening. And so serious discussions about serious things have a very big problem getting above maybe an hour.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Do you think it's an engineered problem, or do you think that's a natural thing? Because like with like TikTok, like you said, they're cutting it down to like 30 seconds to 2 minutes. Do you think they're engineering like even more? Because I have found since I have been on the internet, I have less attention to pay to read.
Yeah. So
And the more time I spend on the internet in a day, the less likely I am to read.
So I think to the actual question, the answer is both, right? Very clearly, Peterson talks about the marshmallow thing, right?
Mhm.
There's this 2-year-old. We see if you'll eat the marshmallow or wait for two, and
Right.
that is a 2-year-old sampling of time preference, right? Does this kid want to wait to get a second marshmallow?
Mm.
And while that to some degree is going to lower naturally based on living a faster paced life, right? Um, you know, Driving at 60 miles an hour is going to decrease your time preference versus a guy that just walks.
Right.
It's just true, right? Like you make a 10-mile drive in like 8 minutes or whatever, because we all drive 200 miles an hour or, you know, and so you think going to the store means like, hey, I've got to spend 15 minutes in the car to get there. I'm going to spend 30 minutes in the store. I'm going to spend 15 minutes coming home. If you're talking to a guy who's never seen a car in his life, going to the store is like a full day prospect, right? And
Right.
so he is not gauging go to the store in the same way you are. He is planning that and in serious ways. And so just as a byproduct of technology, right? The whole you have all human knowledge in your pocket at all times with a cell phone thing, right?
Mhm.
Um, is it worth it for me to learn the basic concepts of thousands and thousands of things, or just Google it, right? And in that sense, as technology increases, it's going to be a little bit natural for time preference to decrease. But at the same time, we know that some of these things have been engineered, right? We know that um, one, the government has a massive control over people who create TV shows, and SpongeBob would have been kicked off the air in 1975 before the first episode aired, right? It never would have made it,
Mm.
but it's, a 20-year long show at this point or whatever it is. Um, and these things, the faster flashing lights and on and on and on and on, right? It keeps kids watching it because it's tagging the parts of their brain that say it's a new thing, right? And so if you watch these things, if you go back and go watch SpongeBob, Rugrats, and the Addams Family. And by the Addams Family, I mean the '60s Addams Family, right? And the stories of the Addams Family, the one scene story portion of it is 5 to 10 minutes long. It is hooked into the prior and hooked into the post scene. By the time you get to Rugrats, there's sort of a through storyline where they're all trying to escape the pen or something like that, right? But they need to get a screwdriver, and they very seriously shift the focus of what's going on. And by the time you get to SpongeBob, you could replace it with a flashing light and an obnoxious horn, right?
Yeah.
And I have trouble thinking that's by accident, specifically given how much we know the government controls media.
Mm. So when you take into consideration the way that these things are operating in modern terms, and you look at what's happening with the DEI, ESG kind of component in this fight that we're seeing, how much were you surprised by this whole Bud Light thing, Dylan Mulvaney hanging on for 2 months?
I'm going to stop you right there and do a horrible thing in showbiz. That was possibly one of the best segues I've ever heard in my fucking life. Well played, sir. So, kind of none, right? And they tie together better than I initially probably would have thought. When
I was almost going to abandon that segment, but then like you just kept I was like, wait, this ties in really well.
yeah. So, one where we're the commercial itself, right, is one of those function of time preference things, because commercials used to be like, go back and watch old commercials, they're like 5 minutes long. It's a giant, this is the new Toyota and it does, and this guy's telling you technical specs and all kinds of things. Now it's Dylan Mulvaney holding a can of beer, right, and look, I'm at a can of beer, right, and that so when you have these short things like that, one of the things that is required is that it peak in emotion, right? Because if you have a 30-second clip of nothing, right, if I just post a 30-second clip of the black, everyone is going to watch this and be like, the fuck was that about, right? But if on the other hand, I have a 30-second clip of me beating a puppy to death, right, everyone is going to be pissed everywhere, right? And so for what seems to be happening with a lot of this like ESG interjection is that they're very aware that no one is paying attention to things unless they're angry. And there's a whole bunch of psychological discussion to be had about like how people don't think very well when they're angry, people don't make decisions. And if they're on top of the current thing portion where they are just consistently angry, they don't mount any sort of resistance, right? Despite that they're angry, you can't have anything serious happen. Like, yes, Bud Light is well, Budweiser as a whole, Anheuser-Busch, whoever owns them, I don't
InBev,
remember, right?
InBev, yeah.
Are taking a hit, and they are, right? But get back to me in 5 years on the boycott of Bud Light, right?
I mean, Bud Light right now is down 30% for the year.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a big hit. That's a lot of money. I mean, you're talking probably $2 billion, $3 billion.
Oh yeah.
Because they were the highest selling brand. And they're panicking. They're obviously doing things. They even got in touch with Harley Davidson and made a Harley Davidson can for Budweiser.
Yeah, I heard.
It's like half Harley Davidson, half camouflage. It's like, why can't I see my Harley Davidson? It's because it's camouflaged. So I don't know what they're doing. I know they're panicking. I know Target has all this stuff happening. But what struck me was one of the things that struck me about the whole leftist like reaction to the reaction was they played that old remember that old Bud Light commercial where the dudes dressed up like chicks so they could get ladies night discounts on Bud Light?
Yeah.
Right. And the whole thing was, it was a joke that it was like you would lower yourself to dress like a woman
to get a beer, right?
To get a
For
beer.
less.
And they're saying, oh, well, it's the same thing as Dylan Mulvaney. And it's like, okay, so
it's
Dylan
clearly
Mulvaney.
Not.
like, but in the Dylan Mulvaney thing is such a caricature. It's like you watch it and you see what's going on. You're like, my wife doesn't act like that. My daughter doesn't act like that. There's no woman in my life that I know acts like that. It's actually an insult to women.
Yeah, well, so I forget who pointed it out, but somebody did. There are females that act like that. 5-year-old girls act like that, right? Dancing around in goofball outfits and wanting to get really prettied up. And the problem
You're
is
out.
that
You're hiking high heels. I mean, come on, man. Like, what is this?
right, because the 6-year-old is like, I learned last year we don't hike in high heels, right? And so, but the 5-year-old thinks this is a great idea. We're gonna look super pretty on our walk, right?
Right.
And the thing about this is, it's the KGB used to say, it's not important that you know the propaganda is a lie. In fact, we want you to know the propaganda is a lie. To some degree, this is like insulting you as a human being, right?
Mm.
But what's important is that you repeat the lie, right? It doesn't matter if you believe it or don't. Just repeat it. And Mulvaney is a great example of this, right? Because everyone looks at that thing and goes,
It's a
but
dude.
women don't act like that. That Adam's apple you could land a 747 on. Like, I mean, this dude is carrying around tampons, talking about how he's upset that he hasn't had a period. This was a South Park joke 10 years ago. What the fuck is
Right.
wrong with
Yes.
you, right? And the thing is, it needs to be overt and ridiculous. It needs to be a thing that is not true, but you have to repeat it. You have to acquiesce. You have to go along. And the KGB had a lot of interesting things to say about getting people to do this and how they sort of become not people on the other end, right?
Mm.
And you end up dealing more with not particularly smart dogs, right? You can get them to work, you can get them to do what you want, and you can train them to behave however it is that you feel like. It's so much so that they reference Pavlov like all the time, because Pavlov and his dog, right? Ring the bell.
Yep. Yep.
And so the general idea of a lot of KGB propaganda near the mid to end, well, from about the middle to the end of the Soviet Union, which to be fair is most of the time they existed, was we need to say overtly ridiculous things and punish you for not going along. In this way, you weed out the people who won't become Pavlov's dog. And what you have left is an incredibly compliant populace, which is why the Soviet Union didn't fall with a revolution. It wasn't people picking up guns, right? It was just that the state could no longer hold the apparatus together, and so it just kind of crumbled.
Right.
Because most of what they had left was people who, by rote mechanism, just would repeat the propaganda, just would continue to go along with the story. And so, the gulags were incredibly functional for this because it quite literally was, well, we get rid of you for 10 years. How do you feel about repeating the propaganda now?
Right. Well, so between Bud Light, Target, and there have been a couple of other ones that have popped up here recently. But do you find that there's a little bit of a white pill in here that people are starting to go, wait, all right, this is a little much. I'm not willing to do this. And it seems to be like it's a majority that's beginning to say, y'all need to stop with this shit. Get the politics, get your little social fucking bullshit out of my shopping habits, my everyday life, my day-to-day life. Like, get that away from me. Like, it was bad enough when it infected the NFL. It was bad enough when it affected the NBA. It's got itself in the MLB and the NHL. Now you are like, now you're really fucking with me because you're in my beer. You're not only in my beer, my wife's trying to shop, and you got breast binders and freaking tuck bathing suits right there at the front of your store. My wife doesn't want to see it. My wife doesn't want my kids to see it. Like, so do you think it's getting a little bit more personal now and people are starting to react a little bit more?
Yes, but I don't think it's a good thing.
You don't think it's a good thing? Okay.
So roll back through any leftist propaganda push. And whatever you think, in dear listener, your own personal view of the last leftist push, right? And once
Gay
you're
marriage.
once you're about 30, just by nature of having been alive long enough, right? You will know that these things happen because you will have lived through a few of them. And gay marriage is a great example, right? In 1990, it was basically, look, fine, there's gay people, maybe we should integrate them in society in some fashion, right? And that
maybe in Amarillo, but not in Houston.
well, I was in California at the time, so
oh well, yeah, definitely in California.
But you had Clinton saying this in 92, right? As the president of the United States was, gay people should be a part of life, right? It was very low key. It was very kind of subtle, right? It was not this overt leftist push. But if you roll back 5 years before that, right, you start to see the overtly gay propaganda. You get the late 80s gay nightclub thing. You get all of this massive push, it's okay to be gay, and all those other kinds of things, right? That happened, late 80s, right? Is where they all started. And the 80s answer to that was go fuck yourself, right? So this massive push happened and it was unpopular. And so they reeled it back in. And 5 years later, the president of the United States is saying a slightly tepid, but very equivalent thing. And from there, we moved to gay marriage in, what did that happen? 2014 was the SCOTUS ruling. So it took another.
No, wait. Was it 14?
Or is it 9?
Yeah, Obama was still in office. So yeah, I would say it was 14. Yeah.
Yeah.
Somewhere around there.
And so it takes another 20 years before, when this came through with Bush too, right? Where that was the civil union discussion, right? Where, hey, look, marriage is a religious word. It is a thing that belongs to a very specific place. What we're going to do is take the entire U.S. marriage code, cross out the word marriage, and write civil union above it and make it a law. And that was not acceptable, right?
Which made more sense.
It did, right? And would not have pissed off all of the right. I mean, to be fair, there still would have been some, but plenty of the right. I recall hearing like Rush talking about this. It was like, look, if we're going to let these people live here as general citizens, then and we're going to do this, then this is basically the right way, right? If we're going to say that they have legal capability to speak for each other because they're a domestic partnership of some variety, civil union sounds like an okay way to do it to me. And the answer to that was no. That was not enough, right? And one of the things that came out of this is, people, everyone in the world likes to talk about how California is a place full of crazy people, but they tried to pass gay marriage as state law something like 20 times. And as the case hit the Supreme Court, it passed, right? But for decades, they'd been trying to pass gay marriage in California. And the answer was no, 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 right? And so even there, they couldn't get gay marriage to be a thing until the Supreme Court basically looked like they were going to say yes. And then the population jumped out and said, yeah, we want to do it. Right.
So how do you fight this though? Like, so it's obvious that there's this Malthusian idea that we need to sterilize children to keep from reproducing.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, we have to propagandize them with this ideology that they are some other gender than actually exists, because gender is actually it's a linguistic term, not sexual. And
right.
So now we're going to consider, now we're convincing children that they are all these other things, and we're going to castrate them, we're going to sterilize them, blah blah blah. Now we have like Ron DeSantis, who just announced today that he was running for president. We didn't even get into that because I wasn't really prepared to talk about that. I don't have a lot of faith in him. He seems like a typical politician to me, but I could be wrong. Fine. that it's always possible, but he has done some things on the state level to block some of these things. I know Texas is working on some different things to block these surgeries that are
Yeah.
available, even though the biggest children's hospital in Texas, which is in Houston, has been accused of doing all kinds of things behind parents' back. So what do you do? Where do you go to stop this? How do you how do you instill this into children that are being propagandized at every turn to, hey man, like this isn't right. Like what they're telling you is a complete total fucking crock of shit. Because that's really where you need to go with it. You don't need to go to the government with it. You need to go to your kids with it. You need
Yeah.
to teach them these morals, these principles, and hey, this is how we fight it.
So, I mean, there's two answers to this. One is a personal level, and that one is much easier. So we're going to start there, right? Quite literally, the cry of the internet for the past 6 months or so has been homeschool your kids, and that's a reality. Love it or loathe it. What you are doing if you send your kids to a public school is trusting that one of the worst organizations in the country, the teachers union, is the kind of people who should both have effective custody and information control over your children. And look, if you've ever listened to the heads of any of even the local heads of the teachers unions talk, these people are terrible people.
They're sick.
And there's a and I get it. The current generation of parents, of which I am one, is the generation that grew up with just enough of the old teachers hanging around. Like I had a guy when I was in high school. He'd been teaching high school for 30 years, right? And this was in the 90s, so like he was, I don't know, back in like 1960. He's teaching high school, and he was only still there because he loved teaching, right? That guy was untouchable. He did whatever he wanted, and it didn't matter what the rest of the school was doing. And even then, right, school sucked. It was boring. But we all look back on these teachers going, trying to, even if it was only a handful, trying to teach us something, trying to better our lives. And while that might only have been 10 or whatever percent of those teachers, the rest of them you kind of muddled through, and you remember the teachers that really had an impact, right? And that is not quite how it is anymore. For that guy to still be teaching high school today, he would have to be like 90. He would be, teaching for 50 plus years, 60 years, right? Those people are gone. What is there now? Even the older generations of teachers now are, granted, better, but they're only better. They're the ones that started teaching in the 2000s. Those are people with 20-year teaching careers now, right? So
Can I push back on you just a little bit though?
shoot.
All right. So since the 80s, the economy has been diluted to such an effect that you need two-parent households. How do you accomplish this when both parents are working full-time?
So the easy answer to that is live like you lived in the 80s, right? So
Yeah, but people lived in the 80s the way they live today.
not a chance.
Today they couldn't afford to buy a home on a one income. In the 80s they could. Like
So
it's just a totally different. They've totally fucked up the economy to the point where it's necessary. And I think it was intentional. They did it by to necessarily drag the parents out away from the children so that they could then have the children. I believe that is actually the intent, but it's like,
hold
what
on
do
a
you
minute,
do?
because you don't live today the way that you did in the 80s, right? In 1980, effectively, a statistical zero of people had a cell phone. On average, a two-parent household in the United States has two cell phones, right? And that is only true until that kid. I mean, the years get younger and younger, but like you could roll it down to 5, and now they've got 3 cell phones, right? And you're paying, even if you're on garbage mobile, you're paying at least $100 a month for those 3 cell phones.
Okay.
You're paying for cable TV. 50-50 at this point. But if not, you're paying for the internet. In the 80s, cable TV was in something like 50% of households, right? So half the country was not paying a cable bill. None of the country, like a couple of colleges, were paying an internet bill. You're paying an internet bill, right? And look, don't get me wrong. If you make money off the internet, then good. But Netflix did not exist. On and on and on and on, right? And one of the
I see
some of
what
these
you're. I
things,
see what you're saying. I see what you're
some of
saying.
these things you can't get away from because you like Clinton legally mandated car insurance. So in 1980, you didn't have to have car insurance, and so you could get away from
Oh, you wait. We're supposed to have car insurance.
that. But still, you could if you were not interested in the easier lifestyle things, right? You could live this way. And some of the big things people are really not going to like. For example, granted, this is 1970 as opposed to 1980, but in 1970, something like 20% of the country had air conditioning, right? When was the last time you walked into a house without some kind of air conditioning?
Today,
Right? But
the AC
not
guy shows up tomorrow. Today,
right.
I'm miserable today.
But it's not a thing that wasn't. And by the way, your AC system is $10,000 for your house price, give or take.
Honestly, we don't run our AC constantly. Like
It doesn't matter. You pay for it when you buy the house, right? Because that 10 grand of material and time and expertise that went into putting that thing in there, someone's charging for that.
Oh yeah, no. But what I'm saying is we're not running the AC constantly, so we don't have that constant bill like coming down. It's just there are particular points in time within the summer in Southeast Texas where you could not survive sitting in a home without
you don't have to
something.
tell me. I leave my AC on at 72, right? Like basically
no,
365
like,
days.
Ours is usually like if we even turn it on, it's like 78.
But on the flip side, I'm at a point in my life where leaving my AC on at 72 doesn't bother me.
Right. It doesn't hurt you.
Yeah, now, look, there are other things involved here. One, don't be in a city, right? Somebody sends me this stupid little graphic because I give a speech like this pretty regularly. Somebody sends me this stupid little graphic. The median home price in the United States is $750,000. Yes. All right.
In the city?
On the flip side, San Diego, like 3 or 4 years ago, had a 9,000 square foot plot with a literal burned out house on it that sold for something like $600,000, right? The median home price in the United States includes that house. All right.
I bought my house. I'll be up front. I have a 5-bedroom house on 9 acres of land.
Yeah.
177,000.
So 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 20 acres, 250,000.
Yeah, right. You don't have to kill yourself to get a home. But I think what they're talking about is like I think the median in like a city like Houston, 210,000, 230,000 for a neighborhood home in a subdivision, and that's where a lot of people want to live. And you want to live in the suburbs, fine. That's on you.
So this is the thing, and you hit the word a couple of times there, right? Want. And that's it. So in the 80s, right? Like I remember houses that I lived in the 80s. Well, I guess to be fair, I should go with the 90s.
I lived in apartments.
My parents were doing pretty well in the 80s. They were not doing so well in the 90s.
No,
right?
No,
and
my parents weren't. We were living in government housing apartments, like ghetto.
I spent a decent amount of time in that same sort of thing. There, I lived in this little apartment complex in a crappy little town that is now actually a city, but at the time it was a crappy little town. And like 6 of the neighbors to the apartment complex had chickens in the city. It was that kind of city at the time, right?
Oh, it's like Beaumont.
Yeah. Right. And so, but what is not true about those places is that they're super expensive, right? They're just not. Yeah. And so, you can say, you can either say, I have to have my $200 and something thousand house, my brand new car with a new car payment. And by the way, in the 90s, my family drove cars that were anywhere between 10 and 20 years old, that they bought cash, right? Oh, Don, but you can't do that now. You can, right?
Yeah.
Go find a 20-year-old car right now, a 2003, whatever you want. You can probably buy it for $5,000 cash. Don, but that car doesn't have. That's right. It doesn't have luxury A, B, and C. It doesn't have, power, not all hydraulic, no rack and pinion power steering, right? Well, actually, it might. By 2003, that was pretty common.
Yeah.
It will have. It will have AC. It will have most of the luxuries. It will not have remote start.
If you get a 2003 diesel, you don't have DEF, which is a positive.
Right. And on and on and on this goes. And so you don't actually have to live this way. We choose to live this way, right?
Yeah.
Even if you wanted, even if what you said is, I need that $230,000 house, right? What's the mortgage on that right now? Like probably $1,600 a month or something like that, right?
Probably more than that. It's probably closer to 19. Yeah.
Well, not for $230,000, right?
Well, the way interest is running right now with
well, let's ask Google, because Google will give me some crap, right? So Google thinks that at an 8% interest rate, 230,000 is 1,700 a month, right?
Oh, okay.
So now, presumably, it's been a thing in this country that half your income goes to your mortgage for God knows.
Oh, you know where I got jacked up is because the insurance wasn't included in that. See, because what happened to us last year is with the inflation going up so much, we have a set interest rate, but our insurance and our taxes went up so much, and which is included into our mortgage.
Yeah.
That our mortgage went up $500 every month. Luckily, we could afford it. Like, it wasn't like hurting us. We were like, all right, like whatever.
Right.
We put ourselves in that position, but
yeah, they did the same thing to me, right? But it apparently doesn't include taxes and fees button, which gets you up to $2,085 a month, right? Now, again, the country's been paying roughly half of its income on a per person basis for housing forever, right? And so 2,085 might sound like a ton of money, but if you're paying half of your income to mortgage, you need to make $48,000 a year, right? Which is $20 an hour, right? Basically, this is a very livable circumstance.
Yeah.
But you'd have to be willing to accept the cuts to the rest of your life. You'd have to be willing to say, I didn't buy a PS5, which again didn't exist in 1980, right? I didn't buy whatever luxury item you want. You didn't buy a new TV every year. You didn't, and on and on. And I know conservative media has been spewing this of stop buying Starbucks, just get coffee, right? Just go buy Folgers or whatever.
Fox and Sons.
Yeah, right. But it's true, right? Start eliminating luxury items from your life, and cost of living is not actually that bad.
Right? Yeah, and see, I think that's part of my thing is I'm very like limited in the way I live my life. I spend most of any excess money I have, I'm either buying beer or I'm buying books. Like it's the two B's. That's what I do. I sit around, I drink beer and I chill out, or I'm reading, or I'm something. And that's it. But I always have plenty of money to do that. So I'm like, all right. But I do understand that people aren't in the same situation as me. And so I'm thinking like, well, maybe there's cause for this, cause for that, so.
Sure. Well, it's very easy to want to give people, because there are no people who have hit this kind of middle-age time frame that don't know someone that fell on ridiculously hard times, right?
Yeah.
Like just somewhere in the case of 30 to 50, you meet somebody that is like, yeah, I was doing great. I was in, this job, and then the company folded and I was screwed, right? And while those things happen, it's sort of the same thing as homelessness, which is to say that basically, if you're homeless in the United States for more than 2 weeks, it's because you want to be homeless, right? We work people who don't want to be homeless out of being homeless in like no time flat. If you absolutely insist on not being homeless, right? your house burns to the ground, the insurance company that insures it declares bankruptcy on the same day, and I don't know, the Mexicans accidentally bomb your property, and it is now nuclear waste dump, right? And the only thing you have is your car, right? Because you were at the store at the time that your house became a nuclear waste dump. You go to nearest local service and you go, I need a job, because apparently your job burned down too, right? I need a job and I need somewhere to stay so that I can give them an address. And you will have that in anywhere from 24 to 96 hours, right? Which is, Dawn, it should be in 5 minutes. Okay, well, it's not, but
it's inconvenient, but it's not impossible.
Right. And then you'll have a job. And the moment you have a job, you can basically have a house, right? But what we focus on is, the underwear goes inside the pants skit from like 15 years ago now, right? That comedian, like, yeah, I was walking into Starbucks and there was this guy with his underwear outside his pants. Like, you think that guy could just get a job? Well, no, but that guy probably also does a lot of drugs, like more drugs than you've ever seen in your life, right? Like Pablo Escobar's entire fortune is based on that dude's nose, right? And these are Dawn, but addiction, and it's more complicated. And okay, but in the end, the revealed preference choice is I'd rather live like this and be homeless.
There was a personal choice involved in what is going on there.
And so, like, I mean, we used to talk about how, the entitled generation, right? But we're way more entitled now than we ever have been.
No shit.
I have to have a phone. I have to have unlimited everything, right? And for most of my life, unlimited everything was a non-existent thing in cell phones, right? You paid for minutes. That was how it went. And video calling, that's not a thing, right? And on and on and on and on it goes. And now we act like but Dawn, you have to be on the internet to get a job. First of all, that's not true. Second of all, if you really have to be on the internet to get a job, libraries still let you use them. And for those of you who think that is absurd or obnoxious, there was a time in my life where I was poor, where I went to the library, I set up an email account, and I applied through jobs through a computer at the library. I know these things are true because I did them, right? Now, I'm not 18, and I'm not being told that everything should be given to me on a silver platter. And I'm not thinking that, standard life involves having a brand new car every 1 to 5 years. I bought a car off a neighbor when I was, 18 or 20, and I didn't have the money to pay him in cash. And I went, look, there's a lot of things wrong with this car, and you seem to be having trouble selling it. You're selling it for this much. I'll give you, I get paid on this schedule. I'll give you $100 a paycheck till it's paid off. And he said, well, I don't know. You live next door. I know where to get it if you don't. He kept the key, and I bought this car, right? It wasn't a huge amount of money, but it was to me. I made, I don't know, $10 an hour at the time, something like that. But people don't want to do that, right? People don't want to. You want to go to a lot, and get a car, and have a salesman, and whatever it is, right? And so when you do that, you're paying interest. I paid none, right? I have since bought cars off lots and paid interest on them, but my life permitted me to do that. And the idea that you should do what you have to get what you want is basically dead. And that's why we don't think you can homeschool your kids. Because the reality is a vaguely skilled job, right? Is there a truck driver on planet Earth that does not make $50,000 a year? Well, within the United States. I don't care about Zimbabwe.
Yeah. No, I'd say yes. I mean, there are, especially with local companies, like companies that have you driving locally, you'll get down to 42,000. But
okay, so all right, so your first job as a driver won't allow you to buy a $230,000 house in the
right, but well,
yeah,
but well, becoming a driver at that place nowadays is a lot different than it was too.
True.
Right. You actually have to go to school now. Back whenever I got my CDL, like that wasn't a thing.
Yeah, you just had to go.
You just had to go,
whatever it was.
Yeah, exactly. So it is a lot different becoming a CDL driver nowadays.
So be that as it may, right? Basically anything you can do, not when you're 18, I'll grant you, but it was never. There's this idea that I see 4chan posts about it a lot. I was 18 years old and like I just fell into this great life, and so like you kids just don't understand what hard work is, and they gloss over all the parts where it's like I worked really hard for 35 fucking years.
Yeah, about
Right?
killed myself.
Right. And
broke every bone in my body, pulled every muscle,
right.
tore tendons, like didn't sleep for days, like yeah,
Right. I did a bunch of crazy shit to get here. And yes, along the way, some opportunities presented themselves. And
right,
I said yes. Right. But
right.
there's this idea that at 18 or maybe 22, right, immediately out of college, you should have some job that not only lets you buy a house, but lets you buy a brand new car and keep up with the Joneses in every single way that you possibly can in a world with more technology that even existed at the time that they're criticizing.
Well, yeah. That's why you go get a gender studies degree and go to work at Starbucks.
Exactly. Right. And so the same people doing the same thing, but even worse. Like, okay, you should have got a degree in underwater basket weaving. At least you could have rolled that into welding.
Underwater welding, which pays a lot of money.
Right. I've known some guys that do it, and they get paid $250 an hour. Well, probably not anymore. Probably these days they probably get paid $300 to $500 an hour. But
Yeah,
15 years ago,
lot.
when I met a guy that was doing
you're not going to live
making,
past the age of 60, but you're going to make a lot of money while you're doing it.
Well, so that's another thing is that, I want this low risk life where I never have to do, a step out of whatever it is that I'm comfortable with doing. And that low risk life should pay billions and billions of dollars. Right. I should be Elon Musk for having applied to Walmart. Like, no.
I took a breath. Where's my million?
Exactly. Right. But it sounds ridiculous, but
that's the mentality. Degree, that's that entitlement. That there is an entitlement mentality that it boils down to.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, people, oh, but Don, an apartment here is so expensive. Well, look, when I first moved out of my parents' house to go live on my own, as opposed to, being a part of the family business, which apparently was happening at my age for somebody. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment that was the previous handyman for the apartment complex apartment that they were renting out because the handyman was married to the apartment manager. And so they had a spare apartment. And it was, 300 square feet, maybe. And I'm probably being supremely generous to myself. It was
I don't know what the square footage of my apartment was. When I first moved out, I was 17 when I moved out of my parents' house. And I lived in an apartment off of Highway 6 near West Little York in Bear Creek.
Yeah.
And the apartment was $350 a month.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was late almost every month because I forgot to configure gas into my bills whenever I agreed to this. My mom had to co-sign for it, and I never let her know that I was late. I just kept trying to just plugging away.
Take the money.
Yeah. Right. Just take it. I'll eat ramen noodles, drink tequila, and put gas in my car to go to work. And that's all I did. And I did that, and I did that, and did that. And then I ended up roommating with a buddy of mine who graduated high school. And we got an apartment together. We were both 18 years old, and we fucking figured it out, man. We just kept chugging away and just working. And I was doing weird shit. I was 17 years old. I was a sandblaster and fucking drill press operator for a crane company. Like,
right?
You couldn't do that shit nowadays.
So that's the thing is you can, right? You may
but I'm saying I'm saying a company wouldn't hire you to do that at 17 anymore. Like, you just wouldn't get away with it.
This is a thing that we say a lot, right? But for years I've been telling people, like, people come to me and say stuff like, Don, I'm in this office job and it's terrible. And I'm like, okay, well, take a day off. In fact, take 2 days off, right? Go the first day, go scout all the construction sites in your local area. Second day, walk onto every construction site. Make sure you're wearing a pair of work boots. That's what you need. blue jeans, work boots, t-shirt. That's all. No tools, no nothing. Walk in and say you want to do this job. Worst case scenario, you will get, I don't have any space on my crew, but I know a guy that does if you're really serious. Best case scenario will be, when can you start? And I've been told for years, Don, it doesn't work like that anymore. And then I've equally had, I got a pretty decent friend of mine now who called me up one day after I'd been saying this on the show for a while. And he went, "Are you serious? Is this real?" And I went, "Yeah, it's real. No one believes me, but it's still real. I mean, go find a job that you think you want to do in the trades. Walk onto a site while, early in the morning. Don't be the one that shows up at 3 p.m., right? Or if you do, it better be because you've been talking to trades guys all day." And he was like, "All right, fine. I'm going to take 2 days off work, and we're going to find out if you're full of shit or not." He called me the next day and said, "So I work in the trades now."
Well, no, my thing is I was 17 years old. Like like they're not going to hire a 17-year-old to do this stuff anymore.
And there was a little bit of that.
There were
the
places,
child labor laws are not great now.
Right. Yeah. So, but I didn't care. I was moving out of my parents' apartment. I mean, my parents' house. I was getting my own place.
Yeah.
My mom had co-signed for the apartment. I was like, I'm moving out. My parents were moving to Waco. I wanted to stay in Houston. So I did what I had to do. But hey, man, you told me you had to go at 8, man, and we're 30 minutes over, dude.
Yeah, that'll happen.
All right. So
one of them things I learned a long time ago is set a time before you actually have to go. I shouldn't say that out loud because people are going to be like, "Yeah, so we can book."
Don't take advantage of Dawn. So you have any closing statements, or do you just want to plug away?
So actually, I don't even have that much to plug at the moment. Mostly, you can find me on Twitter at Helo Procurement. About 50% shit posting. There may or may not be a thing right along the lines of where the show ended that I'm going to start doing, because I'm coming to the conclusion that this is what society needs more than anything else, is somebody to go, "No, you actually can make it," right? Like it's going to suck. But on the other end, you will have made it, right?
Yeah.
Because it's, people tell me I've been lucky. People tell me, any number of excuses about why they can't do it. And in the end, it's that they don't want to get up and do it.
I hate it when people tell me I'm lucky, because it's like, you don't know how hard I've fucking killed, like,
oh man,
my ass off. You don't know what I've had to go through to get to where I'm at today. And where I'm at today isn't even that great.
Yeah.
It's a lot better than where I started.
Right.
And
that's the thing. I told my wife when we got married, I'm not lucky. If there's a 90% chance to win something and that thing is based on chance, I'm going to lose.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
A couple of times while we've been married, she's like, "Holy shit, you were not kidding." Nearly every can comes with at least a free soda. Nearly every, for the old Coke days when they put that stuff under the cap, and I'd open one and be like, "Try again next time," and she'd open one and be like $5 at the register, and I was like, "What I tell you?" Like,
yeah, right. Well, so just Twitter. That's where people can find you.
For the moment, I'm probably coming back to Rumble at some point, because basically every other platform has kindly asked me to leave in some way or another. So, but whenever that happens, I'm sure I'll go on some massive tour and tell people that, like, "Hey, I'm actually doing things again." But in the meantime, thanks, by the way. It's been a while since I did this, and I really enjoyed it.
No, man. I mean, we talked a few months ago on Jason's podcast, Jason and Aaron 2-Bit podcast. And I was like, man, like, you and I, we've kind of been in contact for a few years.
Yeah.
Like, and as accounts got like deleted and come back, and we just kind of like intermingled. And I was like, I always wanted to ask you to come on, and just never got around to it. And then like we connected there, hit it off. I really enjoyed talking to you. I really like you, man. I really have a lot of fun, especially with somebody with my sense of humor that is able to look at this shit and just go, It's so fucking absurd, man. It's so absurd.
This is either the worst thing in the world or the most ridiculous thing I've seen today. And you better
Yes.
stick with today because tomorrow's coming.
Right. So I really appreciate you coming on, man. I really do. It was a lot of fun. It was exactly what I expected to get, and more. So
Good. Well, I'm glad I can. I still got some somewhere. Still, best segue in the world. I'm just saying, if you don't appreciate that, you freaking should.
All right, I'm gonna end the recording now, brother. I appreciate you.